The night the police lights flashed across my driveway, everyone thought I was the criminal. Karen stood there, screaming that I broke into her house, and for a moment, even the cops believed her, but the truth hiding inside that moving truck would change everything, and when I opened it, I uncovered a secret so insane. The entire neighborhood went silent. Welcome back to HOA Stories, where the perfect suburbs hide the darkest secrets. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet, gated community in Colorado. I work in real estate. I travel a lot for business, but nothing prepared me for what I found. When I came home one night, to see the HOA president living inside my mansion. And this is how it all started. I stood there, staring at the house I had worked my whole life for. It looked perfect from the outside. Tall windows catching the sunset, stone walls glowing warm, but something was wrong. The curtains were moving. A shadow passed by inside, like someone was walking through the living room. I froze, my suitcase still in my hand. I had been away for weeks. No one should have been here. I stepped closer. The door was unlocked. That alone sent a chill through me. I always locked my doors. Always. I pushed it open slowly. And the smell of perfume drifted out. Not mine. Not anything I recognized. And then I saw her. Karen, the HOA president, standing in my kitchen with a glass of wine in her hand, like she had lived there forever. She smiled when she saw me. But her eyes didn't. "Oh, you're back early," she said, her tone casual, like I was the intruder in my own house. My throat went dry. "What are you doing in here?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my chest was tight. She didn't even flinch. "This house, it's under review by the HOA," she said. "You've been gone too long, and rules are rules." She said it like she was ready. Bang from some official paper. Like my whole life, my home was just another box she could check off on her clipboard. I stepped into the living room. And that's when I noticed the boxes, stacked neatly against the wall. Cardboard marked with black marker. Kitchen. Bedroom. Shoes. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a visit. This was a move-in. "You're living here," I whispered. Karen sipped her wine and smirked. "This is my house now," she said. "As HOA president, I have the right to reassign property if it's abandoned." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, daring me to fight back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My name was on every deed, every tax bill, every mortgage statement. But she stood there, bold, fearless, as if the law bent to her rules, as if the entire neighborhood existed only under her control. I pulled out my phone. "Get out of my house before I call the police," I said. But she laughed, and then she said something that made my skin crawl. "Go ahead, call them. Or better yet, I'll call them for you." She reached for her own phone, her smile curling, and before I could speak, she was already dialing. Minutes later, red and blue lights lit up my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, serious faces, hands resting on their belts. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, some even standing outside. I felt the weight of every eye on me. Karen ran to the officers, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "This man broke into my house," she shouted. Her voice cracked with fake fear. She clutched her chest as if she was the victim. I stood there speechless, watching her put on a performance. And the worst part, the officers looked like they believed her. One of them asked me for ID. I handed over my driver's license, my hands shaking. But Karen was quick. She waved papers in the air, papers I had never seen before. He told them I had abandoned the property, that the HOA had seized it, and that she was the rightful owner now. The cops exchanged glances, and for a moment, my stomach dropped. Would they actually arrest me in front of my own mansion? Would they believe Karen's lies over the truth that I had lived here for years? I glanced at the moving truck in the driveway. The back was open, boxes stacked high. What was she hiding in there? I had a feeling, whatever it was, could change everything. So I turned to the officers and I pointed straight at that truck. "Check the back," I said. "If you want to know the truth, look inside." The officer turned to me, his brow raised. "Sir, is what she's saying true?" I felt my chest tighten. Before I could even answer, Karen jumped in again. "She's lying. He broke into my home." Her voice cracked perfectly, like she had rehearsed this 1,000 times. The neighbors leaned closer from their driveways. I could see the smirks, the whispers. They love this. Suburbia feeds on scandal. And tonight, I was the main course. I knew I needed to keep calm, so I forced my voice steady. "This is my property, my mortgage, my deed." But Karen was fast. She waved another sheet of paper in the air, some fake HOA violation letter, with bold words across the top. Non-compliance, abandoned residence. The officers studied it, and I could see doubt growing in their eyes. How could a simple HOA paper make cops question ownership of $1 million mansion? But that's the sickness of these neighborhoods. HOAs feel bigger than the law. Karen knew that power, and she thrived in it. I stepped back, taking in the house I had built with my own money, every stone, every window, every nail hammered in place. And now, she was telling the world it was hers. I clenched my fists, but I swallowed the anger, because anger was exactly what she wanted. I thought about the stories I had heard from other neighbors, notes left on doors about grass length, threats of fines for holiday, lights being too bright, letters about mailboxes being 2 inches too tall. Karen controlled everything, and if anyone pushed back, she doubled down. It was never about the rules, it was about control. And now, she had taken it too far. The officers asked me to step aside. They wanted to inspect the property. Karen led them in proudly. Walking like a queen returning to her castle, I followed close behind. Every photo on the wall, mine. Every piece of furniture, mine. But she talked over me at every turn. That painting was included with the property. These chairs were here when I moved in. She lied with such ease, such confidence, and the cops scribbled notes, as if her word carried weight. I couldn't breathe. How could this be happening? I was standing in my own living room, and somehow, I was losing. Then, my eyes shifted again to the driveway, that moving truck, those stacked boxes. Why would she move in secretly? If she really thought she owned the place, why hide her life inside cardboard? I walked outside before the officers noticed, my pulse pounding. I pulled open the truck door, and what I saw made my heart stop. Inside were dozens of boxes marked with her name. Karen's name, written in black marker. Shoes, clothes, personal things. But then, something else caught my eye. File folders stacked in the corner. HOA documents, letters, fines, notices. All with neighbors' names on them, dozens of them. It was like she had been storing evidence of every petty battle she ever fought. And then I saw something darker, a folder with my name on it. I grabbed it and flipped it open. Inside was a printed letter, an eviction notice, forged, her signature stamped across the bottom, and worse, copies of my mortgage records. She had dug into my life, my finances, my home. She was planning this takeover long before I ever left town. I felt sick, but I also felt powerful, because now I had proof. I walked back toward the house, the folder tight in my hand. The officers turned as I entered. Karen looked at me, and for the first time, her smile faltered. I dropped the folder on the counter. "Care to explain this?" I asked. The room fell silent. The officers flipped through the papers, their eyes hardened, and Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, tried to laugh it off, called it HOA procedure. But we all knew her game was crumbling. Her lies had finally caught up with her. I stood taller, my voice steady. "This is my house, and now everyone knows it." The officers didn't say much, but their silence spoke louder than anything. They knew the truth. They knew she had crossed a line, but as Karen backed away, her eyes locked on mine. Cold, dangerous. Like this wasn't the end. Like she had another plan waiting in the shadows. And that's when I realized. The battle with Karen wasn't over. Not yet. Karen's eyes drilled into me, her lips curled, but her hands trembled ever so slightly. She knew the officers had seen the folder. She knew her act was slipping, but still. She didn't stop. She leaned against the counter, crossed her arms, and spoke as if nothing had changed. "These are standard HOA procedures," she said. Homeowners sign compliance agreements. Maybe he forgot he signed one years ago. Her voice was calm, but her face twitched at the corners. The officers looked at me. I didn't flinch. "This is forgery," I said. "Look at the signatures. Look at the dates. She's been planning to steal my house." The taller officer thumbed through the folder again. His jaw tightened, but still, he didn't put Karen in handcuffs. He just said he'd make a report. A report? She had broken into my mansion, changed the locks, moved in, forged documents, and all she got was a report. That's when I realized something dark. HOAs had more weight than the law, at least in the eyes of people who didn't want to get involved, and Karen knew exactly how to hit. Behind that power, I wanted to scream, but I held it back, because the more I looked around, the more I saw Karen's purse sitting on my dining table, Karen's laptop open on my couch, her keys, her shoes by the door. This wasn't just trespassing. This was an invasion wrapped in HOA rules and fake authority. The officers stepped outside to talk privately. Karen watched them leave, then turned back to me. Her smirk returned. "You don't get it, do you?" she whispered. "This neighborhood listens to me, not you." Her words cut deep, because I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. For years, people had obeyed her every demand. Paint your fence this color. Cut your grass that short. Park your car exactly here. And they all obeyed, because they feared the fines, the letters, the endless harassment. She was a queen in a kingdom of picket fences. And now, she thought she could crown herself inside my mansion. I clenched the folder in my hand. "You're finished," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true, because the officers came back in, and instead of arresting her, they said this: "This looks like a civil matter. You'll need to take it to court." Court? They were leaving me with a squatter, in my own house. Karen smiled so wide I wanted to smash every wine glass in the kitchen, but I stood still because I realized this wasn't about the cops. This was about outsmarting her. That night, I stayed in a hotel. I hated leaving my mansion in her hands. But I had no choice. She had the keys. She had the locks. She had the arrogance of someone who thought she couldn't lose. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her walking through my rooms, touching my things, drinking wine on my balcony, sleeping in my bed. It made me sick, but it also made me determined. The next morning, I came back with a plan. Karen was in the driveway, watering flowers she had planted herself. She waved at a neighbor walking by, pretending to be the perfect homeowner. As if she hadn't stolen the house from me, I walked right past her, into the garage. She shouted after me, "This is trespassing." But I didn't care, because I knew something she didn't. The security system. Months before, I had upgraded the mansion with smart cameras, every corner of the house, recorded to the cloud, and as soon as I logged in, there it was, footage. Karen dragging boxes into my home, Karen changing the locks, Karen setting up her furniture, every second recorded with timestamps, dates, everything. I smiled for the first time in days, because now I didn't just have papers, I had video. I confronted her again in the driveway. She laughed at first, until I showed her my phone. Her smile broke like glass. "Delete that," she snapped, her voice sharp, desperate. For the first time, she looked cornered. I leaned closer. "This is evidence," I said. "You called the cops on me, but when they see this, it's over." Her face turned pale, but even then, she didn't beg. She just stared at me with those cold HOA eyes and whispered, "You think the board will let you win?" That night, I uploaded the footage everywhere, to the HOA email chain, to neighbors who had been fined, to every single resident who had ever suffered her notes and threats, and the responses poured in. People had stories, dozens of them. One neighbor fined for a loud wind chime, another fined for painting her shutters the wrong shade of white, an elderly man fined for leaving his trash cans out for 1 extra hour. Karen had tortured them all, and now they had proof she was a fraud. By morning, whispers turned into outrage. Neighbors gathered in driveways, in kitchens, at the mailbox. The queen of the HOA was exposed, and I had lit the fire. But here's the thing. When you corner someone like Karen, they don't just give up, they fight harder. And when I saw her car parked outside my man's on the next day, I knew she wasn't finished, because taped to my front door was another letter, another official notice, claiming I was under investigation by the HOA board itself. Her war wasn't over. She wanted to destroy me with the very rules she had twisted for years, and I realized something chilling. I wasn't just fighting for my mansion anymore. I was fighting for the entire neighborhood, because if she could steal from me, she could steal from anyone. The letter on my front door fluttered in the morning breeze, big bold letters across the top. Notice of investigation, signed by the HOA board. But I knew whose hand had written every word. Karen. I ripped it off the door and read it out loud. Claims that I was disrupting community harmony, that I was harassing a board member, that I was illegally occupying my own house. I laughed. But it wasn't real laughter. It was bitter. Heavy, because even after the video evidence, even after the neighbors saw the truth, she was still trying to twist the rules. The neighborhood was divided now. Half of them had finally seen the monster behind the mask. The other half, too afraid to stand against her. Fear was her weapon. Fear of fines. Fear of endless harassment. Fear of being dragged into meetings where she always won. And now, I was the test case. If I fell, no one else would dare fight her. I walked inside, still holding the letter. My mansion didn't even feel like mine anymore. Her perfume lingered in the air. Her dishes were in the sink, her flowers in the yard. It felt like she had planted herself inside the walls, and removing her would take more than just paper and proof. That night, I barely slept again. I sat in the kitchen scrolling through messages from neighbors. One woman wrote me paragraphs about how Karen fined her for kids leaving bikes in the yard. Another said Karen forced him to repaint his fence 3 times, each time claiming the shade of white wasn't community approved. And the worst, a single mom who told me Karen threatened to review her membership after she missed one HOA fee payment by a week. Karen was more than a neighbor. She was a tyrant. The next day, I saw her strutting down the street, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head, as if nothing had changed. The audacity burned me. She waved at a passing jogger, smiled at a family loading groceries, like she was still the queen of the cul-de-sac. But then her eyes met mine, and for just a second, the smile dropped. She hated that I was still here. She hated that I hadn't folded. I decided I wouldn't just sit back anymore. So I went door to door, talking to every neighbor who would listen, sharing the video, the papers, the truth. Some were shocked. Some were relieved. Some were scared to even open the door when I mentioned her name. That's when I understood the full weight of her control. She wasn't just running an HOA. She was running a kingdom built on intimidation, and kingdoms don't fall easily. That evening, a new envelope appeared on my porch, this time thicker. Inside was a cease and desist letter, claiming I was spreading lies, threatening me with a lawsuit for defamation of character. I wanted to tear it to shreds, but I knew better. Karen thrived on reaction. If I gave her anger, she'd use it against me. So instead, I collected everything, every letter, every notice, every false threat. I stacked them in a folder labeled Karen's War, because I knew, eventually, this would end in court. But she didn't just fight on paper, she fought in whispers too. Neighbors told me she was going around saying I had financial trouble, that I was behind on taxes, that I had abandoned the house because I couldn't afford it anymore. All lies. But lies travel fast when they come from the HOA president. The worst was when she tried to turn the board itself against me. Suddenly, I was receiving fines for ridiculous things, grass too long, even though I had been gone and landscapers were scheduled, mailbox not compliant, even though it had been approved years ago, noise complaint. Even though I wasn't even home when the supposed party happened. It was war, not with weapons, but with paper, and ink, and fear. I felt the pressure closing in. Every knock on the door made my stomach twist. Every envelope in the mailbox felt like a grenade. But then, something unexpected happened. One neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Davis, knocked on my door. His hand shook as he held a stack of papers. "She's been doing this to me for years," he whispered. "She fined me for weeds I didn't have, for trash cans I never left out. I couldn't fight her alone." His eyes watered. But now, maybe we can fight together. That moment lit something inside me, because I realized Karen's power wasn't real. It was only strong because everyone faced her alone, one by one, isolated, easy targets. But together, we weren't small. Together, we were a force. I started gathering stories, notes from neighbors, screenshots of letters, pictures of fines taped to doors. I built a case, not just my case, everyone's case. And the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Karen wasn't just petty, she was corrupt, charging hidden maintenance fees that never went anywhere, forcing people to pay cash for repairs that were never made, even threatening to put liens on homes for imaginary debts. The neighborhood wasn't just tired, they were furious, and fury spreads faster than fear. Soon, meetings that were once silent turned loud. Homeowners who never spoke raised their voices. People Karen had silenced for years finally pushed back. But with every meeting, every confrontation, Karen grew colder, her voice sharper, her punishments harsher. She wasn't letting go without a fight. One night, I came home to find another notice taped to my door. But this time, it wasn't just a fine. It was a summons. Karen was suing me. For defamation, for harassment, for emotional distress. I laughed at the absurdity. But the laugh faded quickly, because I knew. Lawsuits aren't cheap, and that's exactly what she wanted. To drain me, to break me, to make me regret ever standing up to her. I sat on my porch, the paper crumpling in my hand, the lights of my mansion glowing behind me, and I asked myself a question I had never asked before. How far was I willing to go? How much was I willing to risk to stop her? Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It wasn't even just about me. It was about every neighbor who had suffered in silence. It was about whether justice could exist in a place where one person had twisted every rule for herself. Karen had called the cops on me. She had invaded my mansion. She had lied, threatened, sued, and still, she was coming back for more. And I knew this war wasn't ending anytime soon. The court summons sat on my kitchen counter like a weapon, its black letters bold, sharp, threatening. It wasn't just paper, it was Karen's attempt to choke me with legal fees, to scare me back into silence, but fear was a language she no longer owned. I spread out everything I had collected, the fake eviction notices, the forged signatures, the video footage of her hauling boxes into my mansion, and now, dozens of stories from neighbors who had lived under her shadow, every fine, every note, every threat, piece by piece. The puzzle was complete. Karen wasn't just petty, she was dangerous. Still, court wasn't cheap, and I knew that was her game. She didn't care if she lost, she just wanted me to bleed money. Time, energy. She wanted to drain me until I collapsed. But something was different now. I wasn't standing alone. When I told my neighbors about the summons, they didn't back away. They stepped closer. Mr. Davis offered to testify, the single mom down the street bro. Copies of her threatening letters. Others slipped envelopes under my door with their own evidence. The very people Karen had silenced for years were finally ready to fight. And that terrified her. I could see it in her eyes the next HOA meeting. She sat at the front table, clipboard clutched like a shield. Her voice snapped sharper than usual. She fined one man for having the wrong shade of mulch, another for excessive patio furniture. She barked out violations as if she was desperate to remind everyone of her power. But the room was different now. People shifted in their seats, whispering, rolling their eyes, and when she banged her gavel and demanded silence, no one obeyed. The king had no clothes, and everyone could finally see it, but a cornered animal doesn't surrender. It strikes. 2 days later, I woke up to find spray paint across my garage door. Liar in red, the paint dripped like blood. A message meant to humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. And it worked. Cars slowed as they passed. Neighbors stopped to stare. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, smiling just enough to let me know she wanted me broken. I called the police. They took photos, wrote a report. But I could already tell nothing would happen. No cameras caught her. No fingerprints were found. It was just another psychological strike, and it almost worked that night. I sat alone staring at the wall, asking myself why I hadn't just ignored her in the first place, why I didn't just let her have her clipboard kingdom. why I risked everything. But then I remembered the stories, the single mom crying over fake fines, the elderly man losing sleep over weeds that didn't exist, the neighbors too scared to hang Christmas lights, and I knew this fight was bigger than me, so I turned the humiliation into fuel. I fixed the garage door, but I didn't cover the truth. I hung a banner, Abby, it, big black letters on white cloth. The HOA president did this. The neighborhood buzzed. People stopped again, not to laugh, but to whisper, not to smirk, but to question. Some even knocked on my door to thank me, because for the first time, someone had turned Karen's tactics against her. She hated it. I saw her pacing in her yard the next day, phone in her hand, talking furiously to someone. Maybe the board, maybe a lawyer, maybe just her own reflection. But she looked rattled, and that meant I was winning. The court date loomed closer. Every night I prepared like it was war, organizing files, printing documents, lining up witnesses. Neighbors came by with cookies, with coffee, with encouragement. We were no longer scared, we were angry, and anger united us, finally. The day came. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust. I sat at the table with my lawyer. Karen sat across from me, perfectly dressed, lipstick sharp as a blade. She smirked at me like she had already won. Her lawyer rattled off accusations, defamation, harassment, trespassing. Each word meant to slice me down. But then it was my turn. I slid the folder across the table. The forged notices, the video footage, the testimonies. The neighbors lined up behind me like soldiers ready to speak. The judge flipped through the evidence slowly, carefully. Karen's smile began to crack. Her lawyer stumbled, stuttered, tried to spin lies into logic, but lies crumble fast when the truth is piled high against them. When the judge finally looked up, the courtroom went silent. "These accusations are baseless," he said. "This case is dismissed." The words hit like thunder. Karen froze. The room erupted in whispers, and for the first time, she had lost. But losing didn't break her. It hardened her, because as we walked out of the courthouse, she leaned close and hissed, "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming." Her voice was low, venomous, and I knew she meant it. That night, I couldn't shake her words. What did she mean? What else could she possibly do? The neighborhood was finally turning against her. Her legal attack had failed, but she wasn't a woman who quit. She was a woman who schemed, and if she couldn't take my house with lies, she might try to take it with something darker. The thought gnawed at me as I locked every door, checked every window, set every alarm, because I knew Karen wasn't finished. The courthouse victory should have felt like freedom, but it didn't, because Karen's last words followed me home like shadows. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming." I replayed them in my head again and again. Her tone wasn't bluff. It wasn't empty. It was a promise. The neighborhood seemed quieter that week. Too quiet. No notes on doors, no fines in mailboxes, no meetings announced. It was as if Karen had vanished. But that silence, it wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm. One night, just after midnight, I heard a noise outside, a faint scratching near the garage. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the driveway. The air was still. The moon washed the street in pale light, and then I saw it. Spray paint again, this time. Not a word, but a symbol. A crude drawing across my garage door. A crown with an X through it. Her message was clear. She was mocking me, mocking my small victory, reminding me that she was still queen in her own twisted kingdom. I called the police again. They came, sighed, wrote another report, but they didn't stay long. To them, it was just vandalism. To me, it was war. The next morning, my neighbors gathered on my lawn, whispering, angry, scared. The elderly man, Mr. Davis, shook his head. "She won't stop," he said. "She'll burn the whole neighborhood down before she lets go of her power." And maybe he was right, because that afternoon, new letters arrived in everyone's mailboxes. Emergency HOA meeting, signed by Karen herself. We all showed up. Curiosity. Anjos. Fear pulling us together, Karen sat at the head table, perfectly dressed as always, but her eyes were different now. Colder, sharper, like a cornered predator. She slammed her gavel. "This community has been under attack," she declared. "By lies, by slander, by people who want to destroy what we've built." Her voice carried across the room, and some nodded, but most sat stiff, waiting, listening. Then she pulled out a folder. "This," she said, holding it high, "is proof." "Proof of what?" She flipped the pages and began reading. Fake violations, exaggerated stories, twisted half-truths. She had built a narrative where I was the villain, the reckless homeowner, the troublemaker, the liar, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. I motioned to revoke his membership in this community. Gasps filled the room. Revoking my membership meant exile. No right to live here. No right to own property. In her twisted mind, it meant stripping me of my home, for good. I stood up, my heart pounding. "That's not how this works," I said. "This is my house, my deed, my name." But Karen smirked. "This board has power," she said. "More power than you think." The room erupted. Some shouted at her, some shouted at me. The meeting spiraled into chaos, and through it all, Karen just sat there, watching, smiling, feeding on the division. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, staring at my mansion, wondering how far she would go, and then I remembered the folders I found in the moving truck. Not just mine, everyone's. She had dirt on every family in the neighborhood, late payments, fines, personal notes. She had been collecting secrets for years, and now she was using them like weapons. The next morning, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, one photo attached, my bedroom window, taken from outside. The caption read, "Nice house, be a shame if something happened to it." My stomach turned to ice. She was watching me, following me, waiting for me to slip. I locked every door, every window, every gate, but I nantiti. U-locks meant nothing to someone like her. She thrived on fear. She wanted me restless. She wanted me broken. Days passed in a blur of tension. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Every rustle of leaves, every car slowing by my driveway made my pulse spike. And then, it got worse. The police came to my door one evening, not because of me, because of a complaint, noise, harassment, threats, filed by Karen. She was turning the system against me, and even though the officers had seen her lies before, procedure forced them to check. Every knock on my door was another reminder. She was still in control of the narrative. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to expose her completely. But part of me wondered, what if she wasn't just playing the HOA anymore? What if she was ready to cross the line into something darker? Because neighbors whispered that they had seen her late at night, standing in her yard, staring at my mansion, lights flickering in her house at 3 a.m., shadows moving across windows when no one was supposed to be there. She was unraveling, and that made her more dangerous than ever. Then came the night that changed everything. I heard another sound outside, louder this time. I grabbed my phone and rushed to the window, and there she was, Karen, dragging another box up my driveway. She wasn't done moving in. She was still trying to claim my mansion as hers. Even after the court case, even after the neighborhood turned, I stormed outside. "What are you doing?" I shouted. She froze, then turned slowly, her face pale in the moonlight. "This house belongs to me," she whispered. Her voice cracked, her hands shook. She wasn't the confident queen anymore. She was desperate, fragile, obsessed. The neighbors started coming out, one by one, drawn by the shouting. Soon half the street stood there, watching, some with phones raised, recording, and for the first time, cares. One had no power, no clipboard, no fake notices, no gavel to slam, just a box in her hands, and the truth in front of everyone. I stepped closer, my voice steady now. "You're done," I said. "You don't control this house. You don't control this street. You don't control us." Her eyes darted around, searching for support, but none came. Only silence, only judgment, only the weight of every lie collapsing around her. She dropped the box. It spilled open on the driveway. Papers, photos, folders. Her secret stash of neighborhood dirt scattered across the pavement. The crowd gasped. Everyone saw it. Proof of her spying, proof of her obsession, proof of the monster behind the mask. Karen froze, her face twisted with rage and fear, and then she ran. down the street, into the shadows, leaving everything behind. The queen had fallen, but even as she disappeared into the night, one thought haunted me. What if she came back? The street stayed silent long after Karen ran, her papers scattered across my driveway. Rustling in the night breeze, neighbors bent down, picking them up carefully, flipping through the pages with wide eyes, fines, threats, photos taken without permission, notes about people's families. It was all there, her secret kingdom of control exposed in the dirt and headlights. One woman held up a folder with her name on it. This is about me, she whispered. Another man found one labeled with his address. Each discovery was like a spark, and soon the whole crowd burned with outrage. Mr. Davis, the elderly neighbor, stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his voice didn't. For years, she made me feel like I was nothing, he said. She told me I didn't belong here, that I was too old to take care of my house, that maybe I should sell and leave. He lifted the folder with his name on it. But now, everyone sees the truth. The crowd erupted in agreement, and for the first time, the neighborhood wasn't divided by fear, it was united by anger. The next morning, the board led an emergency meeting, not led by Karen. She was nowhere to be found. Her seat at the table was empty, and it spoke louder than any gavel she had ever slammed. Neighbors filled the chairs, the aisles, the hallways. Voices that had been silent for years rose loud. They demanded change. They demanded freedom from her rules. They demanded justice. And justice came quickly. The board voted. Karen was removed as president, her membership suspended pending investigation. The very kingdom she built crumbled in a single morning, but her shadow lingered for days, weeks. I looked over my shoulder. Every creak in the house, every car slowing on the street, made me wonder if she had come back. The folder with my name on it still sat in my kitchen, her handwriting across every page like a scar I couldn't scrub away. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt haunted. Then one afternoon, the police knocked on my door. They held a box in their hands. Inside were more of Karen's papers, more proof, more dirt. They said she had been investigated for HOA fraud, that she had stolen money from the community funds, that she had been blackmailing homeowners quietly for years. It wasn't just pettiness, it was crime. And now, she was facing charges. I sat back in my chair after they left, for the first time. The weight lifted just a little. The mansion felt like mine again, the air cleaner, the silence not so heavy. Neighbors stopped by to thank me. Some brought food. Some just offered a handshake. Some whispered apologies for staying silent so long. But I didn't blame them. I knew what fear could do. The neighborhood slowly transformed. Laughter returned. Kids played in the yards without parents worrying about violations. Christmas lights went up in colors no one had dared to use before. Mailboxes leaned a little. Grass grew a little higher. And for once, no one cared. It was imperfect. And it was beautiful. One evening, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the street gold for the first time in months. I felt peace. But peace is fragile, because even with Karen gone, her shadow stretched long. I caught myself staring at the end of the street, where her house stood dark, curtains drawn, windows black. She hadn't come back, but the emptiness was almost worse. It felt like the silence of someone plotting. And then, one night, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a single line scrawled across the paper in familiar handwriting. This isn't finished. My hand trembled as I held it. My stomach turned cold. She was out there, watching, waiting. The neighborhood may have moved on, but I knew Karen wasn't the kind of storm that passed quietly. She was the kind that circled back when you least expected it. And as I locked my doors that night, I asked myself a question I might never be able to answer. Would I ever truly be free of her? And now I'll ask you. If the HOA president who ruined your life disappeared but left you one last note saying, "This isn't finished," would you live in fear, or would you be ready for her return? Comment below. Because sometimes in suburbia, the scariest battles aren't the ones you fight on the street, they're the ones waiting in the dark.